territory, or country, of Bigeria was mostly consisted of plain fields, and therefore the Bigerians were once field natives. But when 10 nations came to Apastica to colonize, they decided to disregard the traditional native ways and became the first Apasican nation of many to modernize and be recognized as its own country, which the 10 nations at the time were Kandahar, Basaja, and Bulgaria that were in colonizing then, but over time it grew. Anyway, the leader of Nigeria at this time was a man by the name of Salem Alabu. Their country would be discovered and would later be recognized and announced by the Kandahar and the MIPR courts on August 19th, 2023. Now we're going to ahead and move on to the events that happened over the years. When Salem was leading the country, he wanted to be isolated from any wars or conflicts because his army wasn't ready or strong enough to fight. After a while of isolation and training, his army and soldiers were ready. The first war that Bulgaria would participate in as a mercenary ally to Tyrrhenia would be during the Tyrrhenian invasion of Goland, but despite their efforts, they lost the war, but were paid handsomely for their help. Salem, seeing this, decided to keep the money they were paid for the job that they tried to do but failed, and think about whether his country should be a neutral mercenary state or an independent neutral state. But the choice would soon be finalized by joining other Apasican nations in the first plan to liberate their country from the imperial powers during the First Apasican Revolt, which began on January 2nd to the 15th of 2024. Bigeria joined with the first members of the Apasican Union, which were the countries of Egypt, the Bagon Republic, and Gingola, because they believed that with their armies combined, they can overthrow or kick out the imperial powers, but once again, their efforts in joining would fail, and his choice at this time was to remain independent. But when their country was threatened by the Tanarian Empire on July 2nd, 2024, they looked to make alliances with Egypt and the imperial powers to prevent Tanaria and its allies from invading and conquering his nation as a colony. This war would be known as the Tanarian invasion of Apasika, which began on July 2nd and ended on the 30th of 2024. But despite the number of allies Bigeria had made, they were no match for the Tanarian Empire's strategy and strength in numbers, resulting with Bigeria and Egypt being occupied as colony states for the empire. The only way that the people of Bigeria survived during this time was being forced to follow Tanarian laws and ways, along with being paid for their good behavior and tribute to Solomon Mustafa. But despite adapting to the Tanarians, they were mistreated and looked down as workers for their production of resources that the empire has seized from them. When the Egyptians began their war of liberation on December 5th of 2024, they secretly were happy, but being under Tanarian rule, they were forced to hide their joy and join in on Tanaria's side as soldiers. Sure, they could have revolted, but their army wasn't enough to handle the entire force of the Tanarian Empire, so they played along until the Allied soldiers finally defeated the Tanarian forces and liberated their country on January 15, 2024. After the war and their liberation, Salem decided the best way to keep his nation alive until his army grew big enough was to make his country a mercenary state, and that was at the time the only way he could make money because all his country's resources were drained by the Tanarians and their allies. This also gave time for Bigeria's army and population to grow. Bigeria as a mercenary nation began to participate in conflicts, serving on the side of Brazil during the Second Brazil-Manaus War from May 27th to June 13th of 2025, and the Grazgarian War from October 10th to November 17th of 2025 as well. But the defeat of Brazil during the end of the Grazgarian War would be the beginning of Bigeria's new government being formed through division and blood. Even though Salem led his nation well, his ways of paying the people for their service were not as satisfactory. Civilian payments for providing, making, and building weapons for the Bigerian military were as low as 11 cents an hour. The soldiers were paid $30 to $50 whether fighting for their country or defending it or protecting it from enemy nations, which most of the time soldiers were okay with the pay, but others were not happy about it. Soon, people who opposed Salem's pay methods began to form a peaceful protest by quitting their jobs and marched straight to the capital, demanding that Salem should change their ways. But when they would finally see the leader came to them to say his piece about what he would do, it would result with Salem ordering the people to disperse, and that he would change if they did so or respected his authority, which none of his people believed nor wanted to. And then nor his people believed it or wanted to. Then the spark of the Bigerian Civil War would begin. On January 10, 2026, the war would end with the death of Salem on January 10th of 2026. But the war would end with the death of Salem on January 24th, 14 days later, when these followers of Salem realized who he truly was, which was a greedy coward and terrible leader. And they took matters in their own hands, and the leader of the rebel army, Uzuma, will be placed as the new elected leader by elimination of the old one. Now with Uzuma running the country, he has already begun to change the payment system for his people and made sure that everyone had the right to agree or disagree what actions their country must do about certain situations, such as war or joining a conflict that piques or has not meet their interests in joining in the first place, along with pricing their products for a fair amount price for other countries to buy, so that they could receive money through trading rather being used as a puppet force for powerful countries.